This is a response to the worst argument in all of ever. Part 5, Communists. Kim Jong-il, Stalin, and Jesus. Okay, so Hitler was not an atheist, but what about Kim Jong-il? He's a communist, and aren't all communists atheists? Well, the head of state of North Korea is Kim Jong-il, who's been dead since 1994. You see, Kim Jong-il is not an atheist, but believes in ancestor worship instead. Next, was Stalin an atheist? Well, yes, just dumb luck had to give Isman a hit eventually. Stalin was an atheist because he didn't believe in a god. However, in the same way that Stalin's moustache was not the cause of his communism, atheism wasn't either. You see, correlation is not the same as causation. What if Joe Bloggs was an atheist? To say that Joe Bloggs was without a belief in a god, therefore he killed millions, is just a non sequitur. The bottom line is this: an atheist is simply a person who is without a belief in a god or gods. Atheism alone does not provide a reason to cause someone to act. Communism. My observations on the nature of communism is that the adherents hold a set of tenets to be true. This is similar to religious adherents. In fact, communism is no different in this regard than any religion. Whilst technically not a religion, it quacks like a religion. It is certainly religion-like. God's gift to atheism, that's Isman, backs me up on this assertion, that communism is religion-like. He wrote that the communist leader, Joseph Stalin, elevated himself to the status of God and was worshipped like a god, effectively making my point for me. On a humorous note, let's consider Isman's two claims. 1. Joseph Stalin was an atheist. 2. Joseph Stalin elevated himself to the status of God. I would argue that the only way that a person can be elevated to the status of God is if the person is believed to be God. Otherwise they would not have the same status. Case in point, is Jesus a man who has been elevated to the status of God by Christians, is actually believed by them to be God? If Stalin can be both a god and an atheist, then God must be an atheist. This makes sense in a more general way too. Since a monotheistic God does not believe in a higher power, then God must be an atheist. Those that want to live their lives following their God's example should be atheists. Because atheism alone can't cause someone to act, Isman had to equate atheism to communism. You'll recall Isman saying, "Is communism atheism?" "Yes." Here, as Isman borrows a propaganda technique from Adolf Hitler himself. You'll recall that Hitler equated communism to atheism. So let's re-examine the rhetorical question. In fact, the real answer should be no. We have historical evidence that shows that communism can be based on theism. Communes have existed right back to at least the 2nd century before the Common Era. The Ebionites were a group of monastic and dynastic Essenes that lived in a commune on the edge of the Dead Sea. However, communism, as an economic system, suffered from problems back then too. The word Ebionite, translated, means the poor. Want proof that there were theistic communists? Read Josephus. I quote from Antiquities of the Jews, Book 18, Chapter 1, Verse 5. "The doctrine of the Essenes is this, which will not suffer anything to hinder them from having all things in common, so that a rich man enjoys no more of his own wealth than he who hath nothing at all." And here's another quote, this time from The Jewish War. "Nor is there any one to be found among them who hath more than another. For it is a law among them, that those who come to them must let what they have be common to the whole order." This proves that communism predates Marxism and that communism does not rely on atheism. Or if you want more proof, read the Dead Sea Scrolls. The verse in 2 Corinthians 8.9 tells us of Jesus joining the Ebionite community. As a youth, Jesus held personal wealth and was described as being rich. However, upon entry into the commune, he had to give up his personal wealth. But by giving up his personal wealth, the community became rich. This is explained in 2 Corinthians as follows. For ye know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that, though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. The sect of the way that Jesus joined was the Qumran Essene sect. The Qumran Essenes applied the titles the way, the sorrow, and the poor to themselves. They expected two messiahs, a priestly messiah from the line of Zadok or Aaron, and a kingly messiah from the line of King David. Eventually, the sect of the way split. A Dead Sea Scroll fragment found in Cave 4 at Qumran, fragment number 473, tells us that the sect split. It states, "And he placed before you two ways, one which is good and one which is evil. If you choose the good way, he will bless you. But if you choose the evil way, he will curse you." One of the ways was a traditional group and the other a more liberal proto-Christian sect. Jesus eventually modified the religion, as the law was no longer required for a religion that was not in power over the state. In this bit of text, Jesus' way is referred to as the evil way. Not that that means anything. Holy Communion. This was the sacred meal of bread and wine consumed by the Ebionites during their religious services as their communal meal. Hence, it's called communion. The term communion further reveals the communistic origin of Christianity. When I was growing up, I was taught the Lord's Prayer at preschool. It had a verse in it which read, "Give us this day our daily bread." Early versions of the Lord's Prayer have been found to contain a slightly modified version. "Give us this day the bread of tomorrow." The explanation for this is that the two sects shared the same buildings, so the more liberal sect had to move their sacred meals one day earlier. For the 12 apostles, the Last Supper was their Passover meal. They moved the Passover meal one day in advance. We know that the Essene sect of the way lived communally. That is, they held their wealth in common. The book of Acts tells us that the early Christians were also called the way. Act 9.2 states, "And Saul desired of him, the high priest, letters to Damascus to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, the disciples of the Lord, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem." Now the early Christians also held their wealth in common. Acts 2:44 to 45 states, "And all that believed were together, and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all, as every man had need." So the early Christians were called the sect of the way and lived communally. Conclusion to Part 5 on Communists. 1. Kim Jong-il was an ancestor worshipper. 2. Joseph Stalin had a moustache. And 3. If Jesus was born today, we'd call him Chairman Jesus. If Isman was a real Christian, he'd be a communist. This is the end to Part 5 in the series of videos. You just watched Communists, Kim Jong-il, Stalin, and Jesus. Next up, Part 6, the conclusion.